Hey everyone, if you've ever wondered how a single whispered secret can hijack your entire life, do yourself a favor right now, hit subscribe. Turn on notifications and stay with me until the end, because this confession is about to get dangerously real. Steamy office flirting became my addiction the instant she whispered that her husband never touches her. This is my raw, unfiltered truth, no exaggeration. Just the gut-wrenching reality of how an ordinary new job turned me into someone I barely recognize. 6 months ago, I walked into that glass and steel marketing firm as the fresh-faced accountant everyone called the quiet guy, still raw from a breakup, just trying to stay invisible and pay the rent. The elevator doors opened on my first morning, and the scent of fresh coffee mixed with something softer, warmer. I kept my head down, clutching my laptop bag like a shield against the world. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the kind that make everything feel too exposed, too bright, stripping away any chance to hide. I told myself this was just another job. Clock in, crunch numbers, clock out, no complications. No one needed to know how empty my nights had become since she left, how the silence in my apartment pressed in like a weight I couldn't shake. The city outside the lobby windows was already rushing, horns blaring, people weaving through sidewalks with their heads down, and I felt like I was stepping into a life that might swallow me whole if I wasn't careful. If I let even one crack show. Sarah sat in the corner office, two doors down. 38, married 12 years, mother of 2. Her family photos lined her desk like a warning. I chose to ignore smiling husband with his arm around her at some beach vacation. The kind of easy happiness that screams stability, happy kids with gap-toothed grins on a family hike, the whole perfect picture framed in matching silver frames that caught the light just right. She was the one who always remembered my coffee order black with 1 sugar and asked how my weekend went. Nothing more, just the kind of colleague who made the fluorescent lights bearable on those endless afternoons. Her voice had this quiet warmth to it, like it could soften even the sharpest spreadsheet terror. And her laugh. God, that low, genuine laugh that made the corners of her eyes crinkle in the softest way. I noticed it the first time during orientation when someone cracked a bad joke about deadlines, and something in me shifted, just a little, like the ground tilting under my feet without anyone else noticing. At first it was nothing. Really, she'd lean over my desk to drop off a file, her sleeve brushing my arm for half a second, the heat of her skin through thin fabric lingering longer than it should have, like a phantom touch that refused to fade even after she straightened up. I'd catch myself staring at the way her hair fell against her neck when she laughed at something on her screen, the soft curve there catching the light from the window, delicate and inviting in a way that made my chest tighten. Innocent, professional, or so I kept repeating in my head while my pulse did something stupid, quickening in a way that felt almost guilty already, like my body was betraying me before my mind could catch up. One Tuesday afternoon, the rain hammered against the windows, turning the city outside into a gray blur that mirrored the fog in my own chest. Everyone else had already packed up, chasing trains and kids' soccer practices, their voices fading down the hall with hurried goodbyes that echoed a little too loudly in the emptying space. I stayed late to fix a spreadsheet that refused to balance, the numbers swimming on my screen like they were mocking my exhaustion, my loneliness. Sarah appeared in my doorway, coat half on, keys in hand, her hair slightly damp from the walk between buildings, a few strands clinging to her cheek in a way that made her look softer, more real. "Yuri still here?" Her voice was soft, almost surprised, carrying that gentle lilt that always seemed to wrap around the words and pull them closer than they needed to be. She stepped inside, close enough that I could smell that faint lavender drifting from her, not overpowering, just enough to make the air feel thicker, heavier, like it was pulling me in without permission, wrapping around my thoughts until everything else blurred. Numbers don't lie, but they sure like to hide. I tried for a smile that didn't quite land, my throat tightening around the casual tone I was forcing, my heart already picking up speed for reasons I didn't want to name. She didn't laugh or turn to leave like I expected. Instead, she set her bag down and pulled up the extra chair, wheels whispering across the carpet like a secret shared too soon. Too intimate for the office. Our knees were inches apart under the desk, not touching, but close, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her leg, a quiet heat that made the space between us hum with something unspoken, something dangerous that made my skin prickle. She pointed at a column on my screen, her finger hovering just above the mouse, steady but not quite. I forgot how to breathe for a moment, my chest going still as her presence filled the small circle of light from my monitor, pushing everything else into shadow. "You see this? It's off by 3 cents, but it cascades everywhere." Her breath carried the words right against my ear as she leaned in, warm and slightly unsteady, brushing like the softest feather across my skin, sending a shiver I had to hide by shifting in my chair. I nodded, pretending to focus on the figures, but my mind was somewhere else entirely, on the delicate line of her collarbone visible where her blouse dipped just a little, on the way her wedding ring caught the monitor light and flashed like a cold reminder I wanted desperately to ignore. The rain kept falling outside, steady and relentless, each drop against the glass echoing the slow build of tension I couldn't name yet, like a storm gathering in the quiet room, pressing in on us both. We fixed the error together, fingers occasionally grazing over the mouse. Each accidental touch sent a spark racing up my arm, sharp and electric, leaving my skin tingling long after she pulled back. She didn't pull away, neither did I. The air conditioning hummed low in the background, but it did nothing to cool the sudden warmth flooding my face, creeping down my neck. Her lavender scent wrapped around me, mixing with the faint vanilla from her latte, creating this intimate cloud that made the rest of the office feel miles away, like we were the only 2 people left in the building and the world. Days blurred after that, melting into a rhythm I both craved and feared in equal measure. Morning elevator rides where we'd end up standing shoulder to shoulder in the crowded car, the space between us shrinking without either of us moving an inch, bodies swaying with the motion but never quite apart. The doors would close and her arm would brush mine lightly, fabric against fabric, yet it felt like more, like a promise neither of us had voiced. She'd say good morning and her eyes would linger on stark and searching, while I'd reply and feel my voice drop lower than intended, rougher around the edges, heavy with everything I was trying not to feel. Nothing overt. Gravity. That quiet pull that makes the air feel charged, like the moment before lightning strikes when the sky holds its breath. She always smelled like lavender and something faintly sweet, like the vanilla from her morning latte that she sipped slowly at her desk, eyes half closed in that small moment of peace. One afternoon she brought me coffee and asked, the paper cup warm in her hands as she set it down right beside my keyboard. Our fingers brushed when I took it, that single point of contact sending warmth spreading through my chest like spilled honey, slow and impossible to contain, seeping into places I thought had gone cold. "You looked like you needed this," she murmured, voice low enough that it felt meant only for me, her breath carrying the words across the small distance between us, warm against my cheek for the briefest second. I wanted to say thank you, to keep it light and safe, to laugh it off like any normal colleague would. Instead, I just held her gaze and felt my throat tighten, words catching somewhere deep inside where the loneliness lived. She was married. I knew the photos on her desk by heart now, the husband with his easy smile, the kids with their innocent joy, the life that looked so complete from the outside. Yet here we were, inches apart in the middle of a bustling office, sharing a moment that felt heavier than any spreadsheet, heavier than the weight of my own loneliness pressing in at night when the apartment felt too big and too quiet. The guilt gnawed at me constantly, sharp little teeth in the back of my mind, whispering that this was wrong, that I was crossing lines I had no business approaching. What was I doing? She had a life. A family waiting for her at home with dinner and bedtime stories, laughter that wasn't mine to crave. I was the new guy still figuring out how to be an adult without falling apart, my apartment still half unpacked with boxes reminding me of the breakup I couldn't quite shake, the empty side of the bed that stared back at me every night. Every night he'd ride the train home replaying the smallest things, her laugh when I made a dumb joke about tax codes, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, that soft exhale when she concentrated on a report. I'd tell myself to stop, to keep it professional, to remember the ring glinting on her finger like a boundary I had no right to approach, a line drawn in something more permanent than ink. Her smile finding me across the room, and all those promises dissolved like mist under sunlight, leaving only the ache of wanting to be near her one more time, just a little closer, just to feel that warmth again. One evening the office was almost empty, just the low hum of the air conditioning and distant cleaners moving through the halls with their carts, the sounds muffled and far away. Sarah came by my desk with a stack of reports, her heels clicking softly on the carpet, a rhythm that pulled my attention before I even looked up. She set them down and didn't leave. Instead, she perched on the edge of my desk, legs crossed, close enough that her knee nearly brushed my thigh, the fabric of her skirt shifting with a whisper that made my pulse jump. "Rough day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light even as my heart started hammering against my ribs, loud enough I wondered if she could hear it in the quiet. She sighed, shoulders dropping slightly, the movement drawing my eyes to the line of her neck, the way it curved so gracefully into her shoulder. "You have no idea." Her fingers traced the edge of a folder absently, slow circles that made me hyper-aware of every small motion, every subtle shift in her posture. "Sometimes I wonder why I even bother rushing home." The words hung there, heavy, loaded with something vulnerable she wasn't quite naming, something that made the air between us feel thicker, more charged. I waited, breath caught somewhere in my chest, the silence stretching like a thread pulled tight, ready to snap. She looked at me, then really looked. Eyes dark with something raw and exposed, the kind of honesty that strips away the polite masks we wear all day, leaving only the truth underneath. "He never touches me anymore," she whispered, voice cracking just a little on the last word, trembling like it had been held back for far too long, for years maybe. Not once in 2 years. The sentence hit like electricity straight to my core, jolting through me and leaving every nerve alight, buzzing with a heat I couldn't control. The air between us thickened instantly, charged with the weight of her confession, with all the things it implied without saying them outright. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, a frantic rhythm matching the sudden storm building inside my chest, thunder rolling where there should have been calm. Her lavender scent wrapped around me tighter than before, pulling me under like warm water I didn't want to escape. Her hand rested on the desk mere inches from mine, not touching, but God, the space felt alive with possibility, humming with the almost of it all, with the gravity that made it impossible to pull away. I should have said something safe. Something that put distance back between us, like a casual joke or a change of subject, anything to rebuild the wall. Instead, I sat there frozen, caught in the gravity of her words, job by mind screaming warnings: married, kids, job, everything that could shatter in an instant, everything I could lose, but my body leaned forward just a fraction, drawn by the heat in her eyes and the tremble still lingering in her voice, by the hunger that mirrored my own. She didn't move away. Her breathing had changed, shallower now, matching the sudden storm inside me, each breath a quiet confession of its own. The fluorescent light suddenly felt too bright, too exposing, yet neither of us broke the moment, suspended in that fragile bubble where everything almost shifted, where the line between colleague and something more blurred dangerously close to disappearing. That whisper changed everything. In that instant, the careful professional boundary had been clinging to cracked wide open, letting in a flood of heat and hunger I couldn't push back no matter how hard I tried. I became addicted to the way her words made me feel, seen, wanted, pulled into something dangerous and irresistible that made my ordinary days feel electric, alive in a way I hadn't felt in months. My hand twitched on the desk, inching closer to hers without permission from my brain, the ache starting then. Unignorable, a hunger I hadn't felt since before the breakup, now sharpened by the forbidden weight of her situation, by the knowledge that this was wrong yet impossible to ignore, that her confession had lit a fire I didn't know how to put out. She glanced down at our almost touching fingers, then back up at me, her lips parted slightly, as if another secret was hovering right there, waiting to spill, her breath catching in the quiet, unsteady and warm. And in that suspended second, with the office quiet around us and her confession still echoing between us like a live wire, I realized I was already falling. Just to colleagues finishing a deck under the dim glow of the monitors, the rest of the floor already emptied out hours ago. But week after week the routine settled in like a habit I couldn't break. Morning elevator rides where we'd stand shoulder to shoulder, the doors closing with that soft ding that felt too intimate in the quiet. Shared spreadsheets on my screen, her leaning in so close I could count the faint freckles across her nose, her breath brushing my cheek as she pointed at a misplaced number. Late afternoons stretched longer, the low hum of the air conditioning the only sound left, wrapping around us like a blanket no one else was invited under. Good morning started to linger, her voice dropping just a fraction on the last syllable, eyes holding mine a beat too long before she turned away with that small, secret smile. See you tomorrow carried something heavier now, an unspoken promise hanging in the air between us as the elevator doors slid shut again. I caught myself waiting for those moments, my pulse picking up the second I heard her heels clicking down the hall. Her lavender perfume would drift across my desk every time she leaned in, that soft floral scent wrapping around me like warm mist I wanted to breathe deeper into. One night, the office playlist drifted faintly from the lobby speakers, that saxophone from Careless Whisper curling through the empty space while we reviewed final proofs. Her silk blouse brushed my forearm as she reached for a pen, the fabric thin enough that I felt the warmth of her skin underneath, alive and impossibly close. Heat bloomed where we touched, spreading slow and steady up my arm, making my thoughts scatter like papers in a sudden draft. Then, in the half-dark copy room where the machine hummed low and the lights flickered once, she suddenly whispered, voice cracking just enough to reveal the fracture underneath. "My husband never touches me anymore, not once in 2 years." The words landed between us, heavy and raw, stripping away another layer of the careful distance we pretended was still there. I forgot how to breathe for a second, the air turning thick, charged with everything she wasn't saying out loud. Her eyes met mine in the dimness, vulnerable and searching, and I felt the pull deep in my chest, gravity tugging harder than any rational thought could fight. My brain screamed warnings in the silence that followed. She's married, think of the ring on her finger, the life she built, the kids probably waiting at home with dinner plates and bedtime stories. "You selfish bastard, this isn't some harmless game." But my body answered anyway, heart slamming against my ribs, skin tingling where her sleeve had grazed me earlier, every nerve awake and humming. I told myself it was just words, a momentary crack in her armor she'd regret by morning light, even as the lavender clung to my shirt on the train ride home that night, faint but insistent, making me replay her whisper on loop until shame mixed with something sharper, hotter. I sat there frozen in the copy room, caught between the urge to step back and rebuild the wall and the undeniable lean forward, drawn by the tremble still lingering in her voice, by the hunger that echoed my own empty nights. She didn't pull away. Her breathing had shifted, shallower now, each inhale a quiet admission that matched the storm building inside me. The fluorescent lights fell to harsh suddenly, exposing every micro-expression. Yet neither of us moved to break the moment, suspended in that fragile space where professional lines blurred into something dangerous and magnetic. Week after week it became routine without either of us naming it. The proximity eroded the boundaries so gradually I almost didn't notice until they were gone. Shared lunches at our desks when deadlines loomed, her foot accidentally brushing mine under the table, sending a spark up my leg that lingered long after she apologized with a soft laugh. Late night dates where our chairs inched closer, knees nearly touching, the heat from her body radiating through the thin gap of air between us. I started noticing the way her hair fell across her shoulder when she tilted her head to read my notes, the subtle rise and fall of her chest under that silk. The way her fingers hovered near mine on the keyboard as we fixed one last slide. Every good morning carried extra weight now, her eyes searching mine for a second longer, as if checking if the electricity from the night before still hummed between us. And it did. God, it did. I'd catch myself staring at her across the conference table during team meetings, remembering that cracked whisper, feeling the ache bloom low and insistent, forcing myself to look away before anyone noticed. Yet the guilt gnawed at me in waves. She's someone's wife. Those kids deserve a stable home, not this slow unraveling. What kind of man a becoming? Craving the vulnerability she shouldn't be sharing with me, I'd repeat the warnings in my head like a mantra on the way to work, steeling myself to keep it professional, to rebuild the distance. But the second she walked in, lavender trailing softly behind her, all my resolve melted under the warmth of her presence. My body betrayed me every time. Pulse quickening, skin flushing with that familiar heat, the hunger rising unbidden. One afternoon the office emptied early for some team-building thing downstairs. Just us again, finishing the deck under the low hum of the AC. She leaned over my shoulder to highlight a section, her breath warm against my ear, sending shivers down my spine. The silk of her blouse grazed my arm once more, softer this time, deliberate almost. I could feel the tremor in her hand as she pointed, the same crack in her voice from before threatening to return. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to turn my head, too close that last inch. My mind raced, stop this now before it goes further. before they almost become something you can't take back. But the craving won out in small ways, my fingers brushing hers accidentally on purpose when I handed her the mouse, the contact brief yet electric, leaving my skin buzzing for minutes afterward. She didn't flinch. If anything, she lingered, her eyes flicking up to meet mine with that raw honesty again, the kind that made my chest tighten and my thoughts scatter. The lavender scent wrapped tighter around me as the minutes stretched, pulling me under like a current I was too weak to swim against. On the train home that evening, with the city lights blurring past the window, I replayed every micro-moment, the brush of fabric, the cracked whisper echoing in my ears, the way her breathing had synced with mine in the copy room. Shame burned hot in my gut, mixing with the ache that wouldn't fade, leaving me hard and restless, staring at my reflection in the dark glass, wondering how long I could keep pretending this was innocent. Yet the addiction had already taken root, those stolen proximity, the sensory flood of her nearness, the internal war that left me rambling between I need to stop and I can't, it all fed something alive and dangerous inside me. Week after week the routine deepened the pull, until every ordinary office hour felt charged with possibility, with the gravity of her confession still hanging between us like an invisible thread drawing us closer. And just when I thought I could wrestle it back under control, she glanced at me across the desk one evening, lips parting as if another secret hovered right there on the edge, her breath catching in the quiet. The days blurred into this careful dance we both pretended wasn't happening, mornings in the elevator, the space between our shoulders shrinking by invisible degrees, her coat brushing mine as the car rose, carrying the faint trace of her shampoo mixed with that lavender that now haunted my dreams. I'd stand there, hands in my pockets to hide how they wanted to reach, listening to her talk about weekend plans in that soft voice, all while my mind screamed at the wrongness of wanting more from those words. She mentioned her husband once or twice in passing, casual things like he worked late again, but the emptiness in her tone lingered longer than the sentences themselves, pulling at something tender and selfish in me. Afternoons brought the spreadsheets, her chair rolling closer until our arms rested side by side on the desk, the heat from her body seeping through the thin fabric of her sleeve. I pointed a cell on the screen, and she'd lean in, her hair falling forward like a curtain that almost hid the way her eyes flicked to my face instead of the numbers. The air conditioning hummed steadily, but it did nothing to cool the slow burn building wherever we almost touched. Her perfume would catch me off guard, wrapping around my thoughts until I forgot the deadline and only remembered the way her breath had trembled in the copy room. Evenings were the worst or the best, depending on how much I let the guilt win. The floor would empty, lights clicking off one by one down the hall, leaving us in our small pool of desk lamp glow. Just one more revision, she'd say, but her smile carried that unspoken promise, the one that made tomorrow feel like a secret code. Heart already racing, knowing the proximity would erode another layer. Her hand would rest near mine on the mouse pad, fingers curled loosely, the space between them alive with what-ifs. I told myself over and over it was harmless, just colleagues bonding over work stress, but the memory of her whisper replayed uninvited, making my skin prickle with awareness. The internal battle raged quiet and constant. 1 minute I'd be convincing myself to suggest she head home early, to put some distance back in place for both our sakes. The next, her laugh at a silly typo would wash over me, warm and inviting, and I'd lean in instead, breathing her in like a man dying of thirst. She's married, the voice would hiss. Think of the vows, the family photos probably on her phone, the life she's built that doesn't include you slipping into the cracks. But then her knee would brush mine under the desk during a late call, accidental yet lingering, and the rational voice grew quieter, drowned out by the rush of blood in my ears and the ache that settled deep, unignorable. I started noticing everything. The way her blouse shifted when she reached for files, revealing the delicate line of her collarbone for just a heartbeat. The soft sound of her sigh when a slide didn't align right, a sound that made me wonder what other sighs she held back at home. The lavender would cling to my jacket after she left, faint but enough to make the train ride home torture, my mind looping through the almost moments until I arrived at my empty apartment flushed and conflicted, staring at the ceiling wondering what kind of person I was becoming. One particularly long evening, the rain pattering against the windows like impatient fingers, we sat reviewing proofs side by side. The office felt smaller, the air heavier with the storm outside mirroring the one inside. Her arm pressed lightly against mine as she scrolled, the silk cool yet the skin beneath radiating warmth that traveled straight through me. I could hear her breathing change when our eyes met over the screen, that same shallow rhythm from the copy room returning, pulling me closer without a single word spoken. My mind fractured again. Stop. This is dangerous. Her husband is out there living his life while you sit here feeding on her loneliness. But my body stayed put, drawn by the magnetism of her confession, by the way she looked at me like I was the only one who truly saw the hunger she carried. The guilt twisted sharp, but so did the craving, leaving me trembling on the edge of something I knew I shouldn't want yet couldn't release. The addiction grew with every shared glance, every lingering goodnight that promised more unspoken tomorrows. I became hooked on the tension, on the way her nearness made ordinary hours feel electric, alive with possibility and shame intertwined so tightly I couldn't tell them apart. Her lavender scent on my clothes, the memory of silk against skin, the crack in her voice that echoed in quiet moments. They all fed the fire, week after week, until the boundaries felt more like suggestions than rules. And in the half-light of another late night, with the city quieting outside and her presence filling the space between us, she shifted closer once more, her fingers hovering near mine on the desk, breath warm and unsteady as if the next words might break us both. The next morning the break room felt too bright, too ordinary, like the fluorescent lights were mocking how ordinary my hands looked reaching for the creamer. She was already there, stirring her coffee slowly, that lavender scent drifting across the narrow space between us like an invitation I hadn't turned. My fingers brushed the small of her back as I leaned past her, lingering a second longer than friendly, the heat of her body through the thin fabric burning straight into my palm. "If he won't touch you," I murmured, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Someone should." She didn't pull away. Her spine stayed perfectly still under my hand, but her eyes lifted to mine, dark and suddenly hungry in a way that made the air thicken. For the first time the flirting had teeth, real ones, sharp enough to draw blood if we weren't careful. My pulse hammered so loud I was sure she could hear it. I wanted to say more, to pull her closer right there against the counter, but instead I just let my hand drop, the absence of her warmth leaving my fingers cold and aching. The moment stretched heavy with everything we weren't saying, and I could feel the gravity of it pulling at me, even as I stepped back, pretending to focus on my mug. The rest of the day passed in a haze of stolen glances and careful distance. I kept replaying the exact pressure of my palm against her back, the way her breath had hitched just slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Shess married," the voice in my head kept repeating, a steady drumbeat of warning. "You crossed a line," but another part of me, quieter yet insistent, whispered that she hadn't moved away, that her eyes had held mine with something raw and unspoken, a hunger that mirrored the one gnawing at my own chest. I tried to bury myself in spreadsheets and emails, in anything that didn't involve the curve of her neck when she tilted her head or the soft way her fingers tapped against her keyboard, but every small detail dragged me back under. We went back to pretending for 3 long days. Polite smiles across the conference table, safe topics about deadlines and client feedback, nothing that could crack the fragile surface we'd built. The silence between us grew heavy with guilt, thick enough to choke on. Every time our eyes met, I felt the weight of what it said pressing down, reminding me she had a husband, a life, a ring that probably still sat on her finger even when she typed late into the night. I told myself this was better, safer, that the almost moment in the break room had been a mistake born of exhaustion and too much shared coffee. Yet the guilt only made the quiet unbearable. It sat there between us during meetings, in the way her fingers tight and around her pen when I spoke, in the way my own voice faltered when she answered a question directed at the team. The air in the office felt charged, like the moments before a storm when the sky holds its breath. I caught myself watching the delicate way her hair fell against her neck when she leaned over documents, the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders with each breath. Each small detail fed the ache, turning ordinary tasks into tortuous reminders of how close we had come and how desperately I wanted to come closer still. At night I lay awake replaying the break room, the warmth that had lingered on my palm, the way her eyes had darkened with something that felt like surrender even though nothing had happened. The internal war raged on, one half of me begging to suggest she head home early, to put some distance back in place for both our sakes, while the other half leaned into every accidental brush, breathing her in like a man dying of thirst. Then at 11, 17p. My phone lit up with her name. Still thinking about what you said. My thumb hovered over the screen for what felt like forever. The rational voice screamed to delete it, to turn the phone face down and go to sleep like a decent man. Instead, I answered. One reply became 2, then 10. The messages turned filthy fast, words that made my breath catch in the dark of my apartment, each ping ripping another brick from the wall between us. She described how his side of the bed stayed cold, how she lay awake craving contact that never came, her text laced with a vulnerability that made my chest tighten. I told her how it replayed the feel of her back under my hand, how I imagined tracing higher, slower, until the ache became something neither of us could ignore. The exchange stretched late into the night, the glow of my screen the only light in the room. Every word she sent pulled me deeper, her confessions wrapping around me like silk threads, soft yet binding. I could almost hear her voice in the typed phrases, breathy and hesitant, the same shallow rhythm from the copy room echoing in my mind. My own replies grew bolder, describing the electricity of that brief touch, the way her nearness made the world narrow to just the space between us. A cold spike reminding me this was wrong, that I was feeding on her loneliness like a man starved for warmth he had no right to take. Yet I couldn't stop typing, couldn't a craving that made my skin prickle and my heart race with every incoming ping. By morning the rational voice had grown quieter, drowned out by the memory of her words lingering in the quiet hours before dawn. I arrived at the office flushed and restless, avoiding her eyes at first because I knew one look wouldn't do the fragile pretense what tried to rebuild. But the pull was magnetic, impossible to resist for long. We fell into the workday rhythm, but underneath it all the text from the night before hummed like a secret current, making every professional interaction feel layered with hidden meaning. By the 4th day, the incidents started stacking like kindling ready to catch fire. Under the conference table during a long strategy meeting, her fingers found my knee, tracing slow circles that sent electricity racing up my thigh. I kept my face neutral, nodding at the presenter, but my free hand clenched around my pen so hard the plastic creaked. No one noticed. No one could see how her touch made the room tilt, how the professional discussion blurred into background noise while her fingertips wrote secrets against my leg. The circles were deliberate, unhurried, each one pulling my focus tighter until the words on the slide swam before my eyes. Her lavender scent drifted over occasionally when she shifted, faint yet enough to make my throat dry. I wondered if she could feel my pulse jumping under her touch, if she knew how completely she had me caught in that hidden moment. The contact was brief, accidental to anyone watching, but it lingered on my skin like a brand. I sat there a moment longer, pretending to review notes, while my mind replayed the warmth of her fingers, the way they had pressed just enough to promise more without ever crossing into anything undeniable. The internal war flared hot then. This is madness. Stop before it consumes you both, but the craving answered louder, a low hum that made me crave the next stolen instant, even as shame burned in my gut. Later that same afternoon, during a client call, her heel slid deliberately up my calf beneath the desk. The movement was so subtle, so controlled, yet it made my voice falter mid-sentence. I cleared my throat, pretending it was nothing, but her eyes sparkled with quiet triumph across the table. The client kept talking about quarterly targets while her foot pressed higher, the pressure light but insistent, turning every professional word into a private dare. My skin burned where the leather of her shoe met fabric, a reminder that we were playing with something far more dangerous than numbers on a spreadsheet. The sensation raveled upward in slow waves, making it hard to concentrate on anything but the deliberate path she traced. I gripped the edge of the table, fighting to keep my expression steady, while inside everything fractured between the need to pull away and the deeper need to whatever this was becoming. We'd been reviewing slides one last time, shoulders brushing, breath sissening without meaning to. She stepped out first and I followed, telling myself it was only to say goodnight. But the moment the heavy door clicked shut behind us, the air changed. She turned, back against the concrete wall, eyes wide and uncertain, and wanting all at once. I moved without thinking, closing the distance until there was barely space for regret between us. Our lips met in a rush of coffee and desperation, soft at first then deeper, her hands fisting lightly in my shirt as if afraid I might disappear. The taste of her, the small sound she made against my mouth, The way her body leaned into mine like gravity had finally when it all crashed over me in a wave that left me breathless. Her lavender scent enveloped me completely, silk from her blouse whispering against my chest as we pressed closer. I forgot about the cameras, the late hour, the husband waiting somewhere across town. There was only the heat of her mouth, the tremble in her fingers, the way time stretched and narrowed until nothing existed but this almost moment that felt like everything. My mind screamed warnings even as my body surrendered to the pull, the forbidden warmth of her nearness drowning out every rational thought. When we finally broke apart, foreheads still touching, her breath came in shallow bursts against my lips. We shultant. She whispered, but her hands didn't let go. I know, I answered, voice rough, yet I stayed right there, caught in the pull of her eyes, the memory of silken warmth and forbidden hunger already dragging me back under. The guilt hit then, sharp and sudden, like cold water after the heat, but it only mixed with the craving, making everything more intense, more impossible to walk away from. Every time after that the stakes climbed higher, a brush of fingers in the elevator that lasted 3 floors too long, her fingertips grazing mine as the doors slid shut, sending sparks racing up my arm while the mirrored walls reflected our careful expressions. Her leaning over my shoulder to point at a line on the screen, her breath warm against my ear as she murmured something that had nothing to do with the report. The proximity so close I could feel the faint heat radiating from her skin through the fabric. Each incident left me reeling, the rational part of me screaming that this was madness, that we were both married to other lives even if hers felt empty. But the craving only deepened, turning ordinary office hours into a minefield of stolen glances and hidden touches that made my heart race and my conscience twist in equal measure. The lavender scent on my clothes after she left became torture, a constant reminder of how close would come, how much closer I still wanted to get. I'd sit alone at my desk after she'd gone home, staring at the empty chair where she'd been, feeling the ghost of her heel against my calf, the echo of that desperate kiss still lingering on my tongue. The internal war never stopped. Stop this before it destroys you both, the voice would plead, painting pictures of ruined marriages and shattered careers. But then another text would arrive late at night, or her eyes would find mine across the room with that same dark hunger, and the voice would fade beneath the rush of need that made everything else feel distant and unimportant. We were no longer just flirting. The lie had become too thin to hide behind, stripped away by every lingering touch, every heated message, every moment where proximity threatened to become something neither of us could take back. Yet I couldn't stop. The addiction had taken root too deep, feeding on the electricity that crackled whenever she was near, on the way her nearness made me feel alive in a way nothing else had in years. Shame and desire twisted together so tightly I no longer knew where one ended and the other began. And then, late one evening when the office lights had dimmed to their lowest setting and the city outside had gone quiet, she looked at me across the narrow space between our desks, her fingers once again hovering dangerously close to mine, her breath caught, unsteady, as if the next words might finally push us past the point of no return. The office was empty except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the faint glow from our screens. Her phone lit up suddenly on the desk between us, the ringtone cutting through the thick silence like a blade we both pretended not to hear. She glanced at the screen, her husband's name flashing bright, and for one endless second her eyes locked on mine. Conflicted, already sinking into the current we'd created together, I didn't pull my hand away. It stayed right there, under the hem of her skirt, palm pressed warm against the soft skin of her thigh, feeling the subtle tremble that rippled through her like a hidden tide. She answered the call, her voice steady at first, almost unnaturally calm. "Hey, yeah, I'm still at the office." Finishing up some reports with the team, her breath caught sharp when my fingers shifted, the lightest pressure, just enough to remind her I was real, that this moment wasn't some fevered dream we could wake from. I watched her face shift. The quick flash of panic darkening her eyes, the way her lips parted as if words of protest might spill out, but instead she let out a soft laugh into the phone, one that never touched the storm in her gaze. "No, it's fine. Don't wait up. I'll grab something on the way home. Love you too." The guilt washed over her features like sudden rain clouds, heavy and unrelenting, shadowing everything between us. She was spinning excuses for the man waiting at home while my touch lingered in that forbidden space, the heat between our bodies thickening the air until breathing felt like a struggle. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me then, the whole room swaying as reality crashed in. This wasn't playful tension anymore. This was the edge, exposure angling by the thinnest thread, her marriage already fracturing from the weight of that whispered confession earlier. How her husband never touched her anymore, how the silence in their bed had grown louder than any fight they ever had. My mind raced with the fallout. Divorce papers sliding across a sterile table, awkward silences in the hallways if whispers spread, my own job hanging by a thread because I couldn't resist the invisible force drawing me closer to her. Yet the danger only sharpened the ache inside me, turning it hotter, more insistent, like standing at the brink of a fire that promised to swallow us whole without a single trace left behind. Not pushing me away but pressing it closer, fingers lacing in a silent, trembling surrender that said more than any words could. "We're going to get caught," she whispered then, her voice shaking like leaves in a gathering storm, eyes glassy with the same tangled fear and longing that clawed at my own chest. But she didn't move an inch. Neither did I. The space between us stretched taut, her lavender scent wrapping around me like invisible threads pulling tighter, her warmth seeping through every barrier until it settled deep in my bones. The war inside me roared louder than ever. "Stop this now, walk away before the walls crumble and bury us both in the rubble of what we once called safe lives." Drowning the warnings, leaving me breathless and quietly ashamed of how vividly alive it made every nerve feel. From that night forward, everything shifted into a darker, soft-out stolen pockets of time and locked conference rooms during rushed lunch breaks, the soft click of the door sealing us into a private world where only the nearness of our bodies mattered, her leaning back against the cool edge of the long table, my forehead resting gently against hers as we both fought the overwhelming urge to let proximity blur to something irreversible. Secret texts would arrive late at night when the house was still and dark, words innocent enough on the surface but threaded with an undercurrent of hunger that made my heart pound simple lines about a meeting that lingered too long in memory, or the way a casual brush of hands had echoed for hours afterward. Each one landed like a spark on dry leaves, feeding the growing fire, transforming ordinary workdays into a dizzying haze of stolen glances across crowded rooms and hidden currents of electricity that left me unsteady by the time the clock hit 5. I chose to keep going. I accepted this new, fragile equilibrium. Secret texts that pinged at midnight when the rest of the world slept. Locked door moments where time felt borrowed and every shared breath stretched into something eternal. The constant, gnawing ache of wanting what I knew could unravel to entire lives if fate turned just slightly wrong. I gained a hunger that woke me up inside for the first time in years, every sense heightened and singing during those quiet crossings of eyes in the middle of a routine meeting. But I lost the version of myself who used to face the mirror without hesitation, the one who could meet his own reflection and not see the faint shadow of betrayal staring back with quiet accusation. Every faint trace of lavender carried on a breeze now stops me cold, dragging me back to the exact way her presence had filled the air around us, the way her voice would drop low when she shared another fragment of those empty nights at home. I had traded the steady calm of my old routines for this relentless pull, and there were mornings when I'd wonder if the exchange had been worth the slow erosion of the man I used to be. Restless now, guarded, always one misplaced glance away from watching the careful world we'd built start to fracture. It pressed heavy against my ribs every single time the elevator doors whispered shut with only the two of us inside, her shoulder brushing mine in a way that felt too intentional for colleagues, the mirrored walls throwing back faces that strained to look professional while our heartbeats in silent chaos. I'd notice her checking her phone throughout the day, the brief shadow that crossed her expression when his name appeared, and that same sickening lurch would hit me. Knowing I was the hidden reason behind the easy lies she told now, the way her voice stayed level even as her body remembered my nearness. Yet every time she leaned in during a quiet moment and whispered another piece of her distant marriage, how his touches had faded into something mechanical and rare until they felt like absence itself. The magnetism between us only intensified. My conscience twisted harder with each shared secret, sketching sharp images of homes cracking open, of futures altered in ways we couldn't rewind, of my own partner sensing the growing distance without understanding why I lingered at the office with that faraway look. "Stop this," The voice inside would beg on the long drive home through empty streets, before the gathering storm finally breaks and leaves nothing standing. But then another message would light up my screen in the dark, or her fingers would graze mine while handing over a simple folder in the hallway, and the plea would dissolve under the overwhelming rush that made everything else feel muffled and far away. We had moved far beyond simple flirting long ago. The careful excuses we'd hidden behind had worn to thin, peeled away by every touch that lingered one heartbeat longer than it should, every late night exchange heavy with unspoken promise, every instance where our proximity hovered on the brink of crossing into territory we both knew we couldn't return from. On the way, her nearness sharpened the colors of the world and made me feel awake in a life that had started to blur at the edges. Shame and desire had braided together so completely that I could no longer tell them apart, each feeding the other until they formed one endless aching knot. I chose to keep going because the thought of stepping back felt like trying to fight gravity itself. The new reality draped over me like a second, heavier skin. Hurried lunches where food sat untouched while our knees pressed together under a small table in the corner cafe downstairs. Quick encounters in the copy room that left echoes of warmth on my skin for hours afterward, her breath brushing warm against my neck as she murmured something perfectly ordinary for any eavesdropper, but layered with meaning that belonged only to us. Some evenings, long after the last footsteps had faded and the cleaning crew's carts had rolled away, I'd remain at my desk staring at the chair she had occupied earlier, feeling the phantom trace of her presence like an invisible hand against my arm. The guilt would settle deep in my stomach then, heavy as stones, pressing until drawing a full breath hurt, yet somehow that weight only honed the longing sharper, weaving regret and need into one inseparable thread that trailed me all the way home and haunted the edges of my sleep. Even now, weeks removed from that pivotal phone call, the memory clings like smoke that refuses to clear, the precise steadiness in her voice while her body gave away tiny, telling tremors beneath my touch, the brief panic that flickered across her face and somehow made her even more impossibly real in that forbidden light. I had found something rare in those hidden pockets of time, a feeling of being truly noticed, truly drawn toward, in days that had begun to feel flat and colorless before her. But I had surrendered pieces of who I was along the way. The steady confidence I once wore without thinking, the ability to close my eyes at night without the press of endless what-if swaying on my chest like unspoken debts. The lavender scent that sometimes lingered on my jacket after she passed close became its own quiet torment, a reminder of how near we'd already come and how much nearer the pull still urged me to go. I'd find myself pausing on the street when a similar fragrance drifted by, heart tightening with a storm of yearning and self-reproach that left everything spinning. What kind of person was I turning into, reaching for this flame while fully aware it could reduce to separate worlds to ash? Yet every time her eyes met mine carrying that exact same mix of guilt and quiet storm, I understood I wouldn't be the one to end it. The addiction had burrowed further with each passing day, charging the smallest routines with hidden voltage. The way she'd lean slightly over my shoulder to indicate a detail on the monitor, her breath warm and close against my ear, the nearness so intimate I could sense the subtle heat passing through the thin layer of her blouse. Each instance left me off balance afterward, the sensible part of my mind shouting that this path led only to ruin, that we were both gambling with bonds we had sworn to protect. The internal battle never quieted even as I gave into it time after time. Walk away before this consumes everything, the voice would urge in still moments, sketching scenes of explanations that would break hearts, of trying to justify why a few whispered vulnerabilities and lingering proximity had been worth the collapse. But then her words would find me again through a late message, or her hand would seek mine beneath the cover of a shared document during an extended meeting. Have you ever become addicted the second someone whispered their marriage was dead? Would you have stopped, or would you have done exactly what I did, chasing the heat even as it threatened to burn everything down? Drop your story below, smash subscribe if this hit you in the gut. And I'll drop the next episode where I confess exactly how far we went the night we finally stopped pretending it was just flirting. See you there. The question lingers even now, late at night when the office is long empty and dim alone with the echo of her breath against my skin. What if we had stopped? But the truth is, I already know the answer. The pull was too strong, the almost too intoxicating, leaving me suspended in this bittersweet craving that refuses to let go, wondering how much further we'll fall before the floor finally gives